The northern BC road from Prince George to Prince Rupert is now called the Highway of Tears because of the Aboriginal women who have been murdered along its route. You are a band counselor right through there. Your reserve is located along this road. Tell us about the friends you have lost.
Well, there's been quite a few. Just last year on my reserve, there was a murder. We lost Destiny Tom, and it remains unsolved to this day. Also, there have been many, not only recent, but years past, there have been many murders. I remember talking to an elder named Violet Sampere, who's since passed, but she told me one day that I reminded her of her daughter, and because we were laughing and joking around, and immediately she said, "I haven't seen my daughter for 40 years." That was about almost 20 years ago, and that was along Highway 16 that her daughter walked away and was never seen again. This could easily be remedied by a good transit system, along Highway 16, if they would just put something in place, because there's a lot of times there's girls out there hitchhiking who just simply need a ride, and they're trying to be wise and trying to be smart about it and not get in a car that they think is iffy, but still those dangers exist. And instead of looking at the girl and saying, "This is your fault," we have to say, what kind of infrastructure can we put around and in place that'll make these places safer?
So now let's just draw back on the national issue of these nearly 1,200 murdered and missing women and our conversation between your Aboriginal people, our founding peoples, and my people. What do you think the spiritual issue is in this story? What kind of spiritual issues surface?
Well, in my mind, God is much more angry at injustice than I am. And when I think about the women that I have known who have gone missing or who have been murdered, it's Destiny Tom, Nina Joseph, Kim Casimir, Olivia Williams, Serena Abbotsway, the last two who were found on the Picton farm. I can't help but be overwhelmed, and I can't help but feel a real anger and about these issues, and a real hurt. And I had a crisis of faith a few years ago when I was listening to some of the stories of the TRC. And I've heard these stories all my life. I've heard the stories of our courageous and beautiful elders talking about the travesties that happened to them in the residential school, the horrible abuses. And I just took a step back and said, "God, where were you? Where were you when these little children were being so horribly abused?" And I think that is an honest and an okay reaction. When you read the Psalms, you see people who are really human. They're really asking tough questions. And God lets us be human and ask those tough questions. And it took a few months for me to, I think, hear God and to receive what I believe was the best answer that I can give today, and that is that God is much more angry at these things than I am. He is much more angry at the perpetrators of sin than I am. Thank God we can stand behind Jesus. But for these injustices, it gave me a sense of peace to know that the God of justice, the God who is going to make things right, is on our side and is pulling for us.
You just mentioned that, thank God, we can stand behind Jesus for this kind of stuff. What inspiration have you drawn from his life, his examples?
Well, Jesus was a person who lived under the oppression of the Roman government, and his first cousin, was murdered by this government. We read the story of John the Baptist, who was beheaded, and it was a horrific death, and it was a terrible time in their history. And to read that and to realize that I, as a First Nations person, who I have so many first cousins who are like my brothers and sisters, and I think Jesus, as a tribal man, their families would have been similar. And for us, second cousins are like nieces and nephews, or they're like your kids. I have second cousins who call me mom. So this tight-knit community that we have as First Nations, I read it in the Bible and I see Jesus grieving over his first cousin who was brutally murdered over, because of an oppressive government.
We, as white people, feel we will never be able to say sorry enough for what we did with the residential schools, with colonialism. Is there anything we in the non-Aboriginal church can do to help now?
Well, we as Indigenous people, we don't need pity or those kind of things. And, you talk about saying sorry, and we always appreciate that. But if I have a disagreement with my husband and we say sorry, then that sorry is almost, it has to be followed up with a change in behavior. Otherwise, the apology is meaningless. And that's a really important issue as well. And in my travels across Canada, I've gotten to visit churches where I see pastors and I see leaders, I see church lay people who are really interested, who are really engaging with these issues with First Nations people, and they want to see change. They want justice to happen. And that really encourages me.
Well, Cheryl Bear, thank you very mumuch for joining us from the Coast Salish Territory. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorna.